Hi. Well, hello. Welcome to the second podcast of the Be There movement for bipolar disorder. I'm pleased to welcome my first guest, Michael Maciekowich. And I'll be asking him 9 questions, and he will probably do some ad-libbing, and I may ask him some intervening questions. This interview will last approximately 35 minutes. I want to welcome everybody to the podcast, and I'm really happy you're tuning in. Okay, Mike, please introduce
Yes.
yourself and tell us briefly about your background and what you do.
Okay. Yes. So I am the national director of a human resource consulting firm that I started with a partner back in 1999, with a focus in determining how to reward employees. So we look at total rewards, their pay, bonuses, incentives, and the like, and look in the market, and then help our client organizations to determine if they're competitive or if they're also being fair in terms of how they pay their employees. My background really goes back, to 1978 is when I really started my career. It's been a long time.
Don't
Um,
date yourself now.
when I graduated from Loyola University of Chicago with a master's in labor and employee relations. And I had, after that, started working for companies like Zenith Television Corporation when we actually made televisions in America. And that was back in 19,
Long
that was a
time
long
ago.
time ago. Yeah. And then other manufacturing companies. Ultimately, I started working with the American Hospital Association as their internal compensation director, helping with their employees. They represent hospitals in terms of the government and lobbying and the like. And then in 1984, I began my career in consulting. And so I started with a number of consulting firms. And then in 1999, made the decision that it was time to start my own firm and to provide services, especially to nonprofit organizations and smaller organizations, because larger firms really charge way too much. And so we decided that we would make it more reasonable for our nonprofit clients to be able to have access to the expertise. So, and I haven't looked back since 1999, so I've been involved. The firm is Astron Solutions, that's the name, located in Manhattan, in New York. And in fact, that's where we
That's
met
where we met.
because I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, but come into the office monthly and usually stay at one of the local hotels. And that's where we met because you were having a function there, the Wines for Humanity. They were running a function, and I happened to be eating dinner, and I remember you came around and said, "Well, why don't you join us?" So I did,
We
and
invited
lo and
all the
behold,
hotel guests to come to the event.
right, and lo and behold, though, very fortuitous as I went in to really just do some wine tasting, discovered what your purpose and focus was, and it was close to my heart. So that's kind of how we met as well.
Well, this leads us to the next question.
Sure.
And you didn't know about this when we first met last November. How
Correct.
did you learn about the Be There movement?
Right. And that basically was at that moment. I did not know about it or was aware. And it turns out that because I've got personal experience in the issue of bipolarism, and my daughter having been diagnosed with that, I was not aware there was actually a movement around that, or the book.
Starting
That's
the movement. Yeah, well, we're starting it. And you're at the beginning of the movement. You're one of the first
right.
people that are part of the movement.
Right. And it was really interesting because having gone through that for, oh my gosh, 10, 20 years of having experience with the issue, which I'll get into in a moment, it was kind of nice to know that, oh, there's actually people who are interested and want to share the story. And so that's kind of where I kind of fell in.
Yeah, and speaking of that, there's thousands of people out there on TikTok and in
Hmm.
Google groups, excuse me, Facebook groups that are totally focused on bipolar disorder.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
we didn't have that 20, 30 years ago.
No,
And they're communicating with one another to share their stories and to get it out there. Well, now I want them to be part of this movement. We'll talk
sure.
about that later. Now they can be part of this.
Right. Well, I think
How
I think what's happened is that it was 20 years ago. It was still that whole issue that this is not something you talk about. It is not something you share, which has always been a problem in mental health. That it was always. I mean, I go back. I remember politically, if you remember George McGovern, when he had selected Sergeant Shriver to be his running mate for vice president. And it came out that he had been in therapy, just therapy. And he had to resign because 1972, because that was a stigma, right? He had to leave because you couldn't have somebody like that as vice president.
But I thought he was in therapy probably because he had either bipolar disorder or some
Correct.
other a depression or something. And so then I was, oh, God forbid you can't have somebody like that in office.
Correct. Correct. So I think we're at least moving in the right direction.
That's for sure. How old was your daughter when you and your wife found out she was bipolar?
So that didn't occur until she was first a freshman in college.
Okay.
So we're talking about 18, 19, around there. However, there were telltale signs earlier on that we did not realize were the signs that there was an issue because during her high school, she was kind of having sporadic or moments where she couldn't cope, where she would get very angry and, actually literally throw things around in her room. And, so that we just thought, and of course, we went to the counselors at school in high school, and they said, oh, that's just a teenager. They're just going through the change of life and growing up, and, they all go through that. And so, but she kept having those cases where instances where she would just lose control, and then all of a sudden it would go away, and so we had no clue. And again, they even had at the school a school psychiatrist who again told us the same thing, that no, this is nothing wrong, this is just part of normal growing up. And so it wasn't until when she left and then she went to college that she was in a quad with three other girls. So they had four girls in her dorm. And one day, with only a month or so being there, so we're talking like late October, she'd only been in school for a month or so. About 8 o'clock one night, I was in a hotel in New York again, of course, having dinner. And I get a phone call on my cell phone, and they say, this is, the University Medical Center, and your daughter has been admitted to the psychiatric ward. And I'm going, what?
Okay, well, this is a good place for us to stop and lead into the next question.
Right.
Um, could you summarize what actions you took after
Right.
she was now in the
So,
psych ward?
so yes. So basically, what had happened was that she had apparently something had happened in the quad with the other girls, and her reaction was to go into one of the girls' closets and start slashing her dresses. I mean, literally took scissors and started slashing and destroying the other people's property.
Wow.
And so that's when, of course, that they got involved, and that's how they she got admitted, because obviously she was out of control.
Right.
And so I immediately, when I got the phone call, flew to where she was the very next morning, very early, and was able to go and see her. And I heard the story of what happened. And the first thing that I heard is that they were going to expel her because she had been violent towards other students, right? So that means, well, we don't want you here. So they were going to expel her.
Mhm.
And yet, as I'm talking to the psychiatrist where she was, they said, no, she needs care. She needs to be in therapy. We need to diagnose her. We need to start working with her because if you expel someone, that means she would come home, right? She wouldn't get the care where she was. And where she was, they had very professional care available. So I had to go and kind of force myself into a meeting with the president of the university. And I said, first of all, you can't do this. You cannot expel someone because she is protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act.
And that
And
came into law in 1990.
that's right. So it's already been around. And he looked very surprised when I said that. Now, I'm not an attorney, but in human resources, obviously, I'm involved
You know those. Yeah, you know
with
all that.
that law. And I know that it covers students in a university setting. And I said that as a reminder, you have to make a reasonable accommodation. You can't just say you're fired. That's like telling an employee you're fired from work. Well, at the university, you can't expel just because of that. So I forced the issue to say that no, she needs therapy, she needs care. You have that available. So your accommodation, number one, is to provide her that care, which we agreed to, that
Okay.
she would go into therapy. But I said, number two, the other accommodation is that obviously at this stage or her state of mind, she really cannot be in a group setting. She could not live in a dorm setting, that you all have single housing available, which we're willing to pay for. And of course, that brought in the Dean of Housing, who said we can't do that because only juniors and seniors get senior housing. And I said, no, 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 you have to understand, we're talking about a reasonable accommodation. Do you have a vacant room that she could have? And they said yes. And I said, fine. The accommodation is that I'm willing to pay to put her in a single room so that she can adjust and still be able to go to school and go to her classes, and in the meantime commit to having the therapy that she needed, and she could do it right there on the campus. So it was actually a win-win situation for everyone. But I found it fascinating that they were just the easy answer was just kick her out,
That always
which
seems to be the easy answer. Get rid of them, kick them out, not in my backyard.
right,
Just follow the bureaucratic procedures
right,
and don't modify them for anybody.
right. And I was also very surprised they just were not even aware that they had an obligation to address this issue and to deal with this. So that allowed us to have her stay there to begin her therapy with the psychiatrist. They had medication, obviously was involved to kind of even her out, so to speak. But that worked out very, very well for most of her career. We did have one setback during her college and near her senior year or junior year, I'm sorry, a few years later. This was actually a trigger, something triggered her. And what it was is that she broke up with a boy. Well, that's an emotional event, somebody she had been with, and that caused her to have a relapse of that. Now she's alone at this point, so she's not injuring anyone. However, she scared herself when she started having these violent feelings again. And so she called 911. And because she was now in an apartment, by the way, so she had left the campus, and she called 911, not realizing that when you call 911 and you say, I'm suicidal, that is now a police action. So the police then took her back to the psychiatric ward of the medical center. However, now she's on a suicide watch because she told them that she was suicidal. And that made it even more difficult at that point because now, for me to be able to see her, that was not the same as the first time. Now it was no, you can only come in a certain time. And now we have to keep her here. And once again, I had to, fortunately, she was still under the care of a psychiatrist that worked at the same place.
Mhm.
So that psychiatrist was able to say, no, let's look at another option from just keeping her locked in a room in a psychiatric ward. And so she agreed. She had to quit school for a semester, but she had to agree to go into group therapy.
Okay.
And she had to do that 3 days a week. Like, I mean, we're not talking like an hour, we're talking like 3 or 4 hours a day of group therapy 3 days a week for a 3 or 4 month period. And that was the agreement. And then wait, she could come back to school and then finish up her classes and graduate.
And so I assume that you were monitoring all of this while it was going on and staying in touch with her.
Yes, yes. In fact, fortunately for me, where mom could not just leave, she had a job that she had to stay where she was. She's a research scientist, and you just can't leave your labs and do things. Fortunately, being an owner of a consulting firm, I had some flexibility. So I know not everybody listening could say, "Oh, I could have just left home," but I lived with where she was for a number of months and just was there on a regular basis. So I had that advantage, and I understand not everybody's going to have that advantage. But talk about being there. I mean, I literally was there. So I actually
And
picked her up.
you didn't have to be there all the
No,
time.
right. But I actually picked her up every day from her sessions. And then she and I could talk, what did you do today? What did you learn? How are you doing with this? And so that was a long period, but it all worked out. So after her period where she was given a clean bill of health, although will always be, even today, 10 years after her graduation, she is still on a regular basis seeing a psychiatrist and still on a very low dose of medication, but she has adjusted very well. Ended up graduating with a master's degree on honors, both undergrad and graduate with honors. And now working in the world, as a marketing manager and being very successful. However, again, she still has her schedule to go see someone at least once a month.
Well, you covered a lot of the actions you took. And I just want to interject a few
Mhm.
experiences that I have with my sister, and she had to deal with, um, which fortunately you haven't had to deal with. My sister was in and out of psych hospitals and in and out of apartments for years, and so when she would go to a different psych hospital, a different place, and even if it was the same hospital, the same doctors wouldn't be treating her, so they'd have to go get the chart at that hospital. But if it was another hospital, they didn't have access to what the situation was. So
Mhm.
they just have to talk to the individual and then determine what medication to give them. So my sister's medications were constantly being changed, but part of it had to do with her knowing what ones that made her feel a certain way, and she became a prescription drug user. She also liked the painkillers, which she ended
Right.
up getting on. But for
Wow.
12 years, after she was diagnosed, she functioned fine. She finished her master's degree. She worked
Hmm.
psychiatric social work actually, but then she was on lithium and a mild tranquilizer, but then because it became toxic because she overdosed on lithium, so they couldn't
Uh,
give it to her anymore. So that's one of the problems all of you should be aware of when you're dealing with the medications. You need to give the medication time to work, and then if you're going to see another doctor at a different hospital or whatever, you need to do your best to remember what medications you were
sure.
taking at the time, because and they're going to have to adjust the medications or
Sure.
whatever, and to do the blood tests and all that. It's a very complicated process. And
It is.
I don't even
Yeah.
know if my sister, all those years my sister was in and out of the psychiatric hospitals, how often they did the blood tests. I'm
Yeah.
assuming they had to, but Do they treat psych patients differently than somebody who's in the hospital for being treated for an ailment? When I was in the hospital, they constantly check the blood.
Sure,
What about people who are bipolar mentally ill? Maybe they don't want to spend the money checking their blood, but
sure.
they better, because what if the blood could be there, something could be toxic and the person could
That's right.
die? So I
That's right.
assume they do blood tests,
You would hope. You
but
would
I don't
hope.
know the extent to
Yeah,
which they do.
right.
Anyway,
I
they
agree.
should be
And
treated less. They should be treated
yeah,
less than anybody else.
I agree. And that brings to mind there was a piece of that history that I left out, and let me just, it's very important. When she was going through in high school the issues and talking to the school psychiatrist, they actually sent her to an outside psychiatrist,
Okay.
right, who had a practice. And we were just, all we were told was that she has to go. That was part of the deal for her in with the high school. And when she went, but we were not allowed to be with her. Now, she's a minor, right? So I didn't understand any of the rules, but they prescribed her, and I don't remember. I'm not good at drugs, but they prescribed her something that she had a violent reaction to. In fact, she had seizures.
Oh my
In fact,
God.
she started taking that, and then all of a sudden, I get a call that she's in the hospital in the emergency room because she had a seizure during one of her classes. And that was totally related to a drug that had been given to her by this referral psychiatrist that, again, they didn't do. They didn't ask us about any history. They just gave it to her. We're sitting there, and this is the part of education, assuming they know what they're talking about. And we assume they're the professionals. So who are we to even question? But that taught us a very important lesson right there, is to question everything. To speaking about be there during this whole process. Don't just turn it over to someone else. So that lesson helped me in the events that occurred in college because I wanted to know everything. As I talked, I said, I want to know, and I even asked the same question, have you tested to be sure that she won't react to these drugs that you are talking about that she needs to take? I wanted to be sure that everything, and that I knew everything, and I knew what was going to be the schedule and everything. So to me, that lesson from high school of not being there, right, just assuming that you're taking care of this,
Right.
was a very important lesson. So early on, if you see the signs, then you got to get involved right away, and don't assume it's just somebody going through growing pains,
Right.
because
You need to get involved right away. Yeah.
I mean, I still feel guilty about that, because probably if we had been there more early, we may have been able to short circuit what happened later on in college. But because we didn't do that, because we listened to the school and other people, we kind of lost that opportunity to do something early on.
Very good points. I think you covered this, but could you
Okay.
add to what have been your and your daughter's most difficult experiences and why?
Yeah, I think the most difficult, well, obviously for her, it was just going through everything, but the most difficult for me and for us in the family has really been wrapping our head around, like, well, where did this come from, right? We kept thinking about doubt, like, did we do something wrong early on? We started almost blaming ourselves,
Mhm.
for what happened, and or had something happen with her that because I think for her, she was scared. Number one, she didn't know why she was doing this. She felt out of control. So I think for her, the unknown, right? She thought there was something wrong with her. She kept thinking, am I physically something, mentally that's wrong with me? Why am I having this?
But there was something wrong with her, but she didn't know what was wrong with her.
That's right.
She didn't understand it. It was like, oh my, you're just like,
Right.
can't somebody help me?
Right. And also when I meant that she thought something was wrong, meaning that there was something wrong with her, meaning that she's a bad person,
Okay,
that, that type of wrong.
okay.
And not realizing that no, there is something, but now it's basically we're out of balance, right? And we've got to get you back in balance so that you can handle some things. But so I think the most difficult thing was the guilt, the retrospect of trying to think about what did we do wrong, and really blaming. There's a lot of blame went on for that, for a while, and then we finally realized, actually, because we went through counseling too.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I, we had to go through that too to get ourselves, what did we do? Are we bad people because we didn't know about this early enough? And because that makes it hard when you want to try to help somebody if you're still thinking that you did something wrong. So you came to the conclusion that we hadn't, but it was just that's a natural feeling, I think.
Yeah, my mother and I used to, when she was laying on the couch, I'd sit down on the floor next to her and we'd hold each other's hands and, and snuggle a little bit. She said, what's going to become of Betsy when we pass on? And, did I do something as a mother? Could I have just done something different? Could I have been better? Part of we blamed my father's personality, but no, it's a chemical imbalance of the brain. And so
Right.
it's so difficult not to get out of that mind frame of blaming yourself for causing the illness.
That's right.
Anyway, could you describe how you have been there for her beyond what you've already told us?
Sure.
Other
Sure.
examples of being there for her.
So I think what we've done is since then, we are constantly in contact, where originally it was she wanted to be that independence, and don't bother me, I'm doing my own life. But what we've done is basically said, no, we are going to be there for you on a regular basis, meaning that, regular contact. She doesn't live where we live, but we see her a lot. And we want to do that, especially because she is still under the care of a psychiatrist. And so, there are always those chances that something could happen. So we want to constantly, I think the key is we talk a lot. We talk a lot, and really not so much me, it's her. And she really has gotten into that where now she reaches out, and I'll get a text message in the middle of the day. Hey, do you have time? And of course I have time. And then I'll listen. She'll call and then she'll tell me things that are going on, or even when things are bad. Because sometimes, especially at work, she's had some issues at work. Everybody does, where she was again still not able to completely cope, even though she's much better. But, to a point where somebody was, mean to her, at work, and wants to talk to me about that. Or even she even had a discrimination issue at work. She was working for a company where it was run by a bunch of men, and she was given a project and she did something wrong, and we in our presentation, and the owners, the men, basically said, well, isn't that typical of a woman not being able to do her job right? They actually said that, believe it or not.
Nice
And
guys.
yeah,
I guess they don't know the law, but I mean,
well, of course, immediately I gave her the advice to walk into human resources and say, I think I have a hostile work environment. And, so immediately, of course, human resource says, no, we better do something. But, that's the type of thing where I'm there professionally for her, but also obviously as a dad to listen whenever she, and mom gets the other tears, those things. So we're both constantly in contact, and we go see her 5, 6 times a year, just because we feel right now We want to be there for her so she knows that, and that she doesn't have to be ashamed to tell us anything.
Um, well, how is she doing now?
Great, very successful. Is a manager of a small marketing for a small firm, that they love her. And she is now working on, decided to go back, even though she has a master's in English, was what her degree was. But that got her into marketing. Now she's going back and working on a remote Harvard MBA. So she's doing very well, and the company loves her. She's still single, has gone through relationships. That part, we can't help her with that completely. That's something she has to go through. But she's at home, has her cats, and is very, happy. So right now, knock on wood, everything's going well.
So, those of you who are tuning in, I want you to know, just from Michael's experience with his daughter, that there is hope, and that people suffering from bipolar disorder can have successful lives.
Yes.
I certainly can't tell you the numbers of the millions that have it, which of those, how many of the millions have successful lives. And wouldn't it be nice to hear their stories of how they were able to cope with the illness and still, work and, be able to be a productive member of society. But Michael's daughter is an example. And
Yes.
that's wonderful for you to know. If applicable, how can you contribute to the Be There movement?
Well, I think that obviously working with you and being available, to tell the story so people can see that there is hope. And also, watch for those warning signs. I can't emphasize that more and more. Obviously, to support, fundraising events like the Wines for Humanity, and to, be able to support that, to get the message out. And also what I have done is I've shared your website with your book to my clients, so that people are aware, because people like to know, well, I don't know if they have the issue, but I've put it out there through our, website, to be able to say to people, this is something you should be aware of. So I think just getting involved and understanding that this is an issue that we can work on, and it just needs to be, you have to have some focus and support.
Excellent. And we do have some plans for this year. We're planning like at least three wine tastings, of which you're going to be involved in one up in Raleigh, correct?
Correct.
So that'll help the movement and help raise money. Yep. And the podcast, and I'm going to, my first podcast was about the Be There movement and what we're going to be doing. But do you have any wrap-up comments from today's interview?
I think two things. The takeaways, number one is kind of be aware when you see the signs, when things are changing, when you've got someone who it's just not normal. When you see them, their personality has changed. Something is going on. Don't just assume it's just, oh, don't worry about that. They're just going through a rough time, or it's growing pains. Really kind of look and be there for that person early on.
Even if you don't know the person, let's say you see someone on the street or someone in the store or whatever, right?
Right. And even if you're not an authority, that doesn't matter. I think as a person, being there to be able to let them know that you're there, right? As they're going through these things early on, and I think, to me, that was the most important thing. And the last comment is, there is hope, because it does work out. Just right. Got to work, just stick with it. It will work out. And ultimately, we'll all be having smiles and not worrying about what has happened.
Particularly since the person's doing better. than they were
That's
before.
right.
There's always
That's right.
tomorrow to look for. There's no cure for bipolar disorder, but there are
Correct.
more and more medications coming out in the market,
Right.
and more ways for people to be helped. But
Correct.
the Be There movement and the podcast, I hope to bring all of this together.
Right.
Big
That's
picture.
right. There is hope.
There is hope. Michael, thank you so much. And we'll be in touch in the near future. And thank you, everybody, for tuning
Very
in.
welcome.
We'll hope to see you in the next podcast and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Okay. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.